Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to make a quick video and go over some Warhammer 40k army statistics with you guys and gals. It's pretty much win rates for all the current armies in the game, which I think is pretty neat. Recently I was introduced to a website called 40kstats.com, which features all these statistics and win rates, and I figured this was something that you would all be interested in, so I'm making a video about it. The best thing about these stats is that it's hard evidence of how every army is doing, so we don't have to guess. We can just know the actual statistics behind every army and their win rates. So with that said, let's dive into the topic of this video and let's take a look at these statistics and win rates for the Warhammer 40k competitive scene. So this is 40kstats.com. They have a couple of different pages with different statistics on them, so let's go over them all one by one. The first one I want to take a look at is the Faction Breakdown Report. So this page says, Faction Breakdown Report, by the numbers. The table below outlines the current statistics we have for each faction in tournament play. Here you can track the detachment, representation, average win rates, victory points for and against a number of other factors. So basically what it's saying is it tells you all of the factions that are used in competitive play, whether they were a primary detachment or a secondary detachment, or what I like to call as allies. And it gives you their win rate, and win rate is a primary, and just win rate if it's in your list altogether. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It shows you also how many victory points they get on average, average opponent victory points, I'm assuming that's what that is, primary victory points, yada yada yada. But yeah, this is pretty cool. It goes over every army. It shows like Adeptus Sororitas, or Sisters of Battle as we like to call them. They've been in 81 lists. There's been 92 detachments, so a couple of people that chose to use Sisters used multiple detachments and not just one in their army. They were a primary detachment 39 times. They were an ally or a secondary detachment 53 times. They've played in 204 games, because obviously a lot of these lists played in multiple games. And the number of games as a secondary would be, or games as a primary, sorry. That's how many times they played as a primary faction. This is how many games they played as a secondary faction. And then here's their win rate as a primary army. Here's their win rate as a just being in your army. So it could be an ally as well. And yeah, I think these statistics are pretty cool to look at. You get stuff like Inari with a 62 or 60% win rate, which is far above everybody else here. So yeah, it's pretty cool to look at all this stuff. And if you notice, most of the armies are around a 50% win rate, give or take a few percent, obviously, like 45, 46, stuff like that. But I think that actually goes to show that we have a fairly balanced game right now for competitive Warhammer 40k. It would be an ideal world where every army in the game had a 50% win rate. But realistically, that's not possible, so you want to get as close to 50% as possible. And so far, by looking at these statistics, it looks like Games Workshop has done a pretty good job, except for certain armies like Grey Knights, who, yeah, they're kind of suffering. Or even, where's Necrons? Where's Necrons? Oh, Necrons are doing better than Grey Knights. There you go. Now we have the proof. Necrons are better than Grey Knights. You can't really argue with this. These are hard statistics. This isn't an opinion. This is showing Necrons win more often than Grey Knights. So on top of that, you get a bunch of other statistics. You can look over, I'm not going to go over everything. I'm basically just making this video to just talk about a few statistics and to show you guys this website, because I think it's a great tool for anyone that's getting into competitive Warhammer 40k. So yeah, again, all this stuff, really great statistics, really great things to look at. Helps you figure some stuff out. But this isn't, I like this page, but there's other pages I wanted to go over as well, so let's do that. So now with that page covered, let's go over the next page's statistics, which would be the Subfaction results. So Subfaction results. It says here is Alaitoc, the only Craftworld, which is kind of funny because that's the one we see the most often. So now you can actually see, like, whenever you see a Craftworld is having a, like, in the last page, it would show Craftworlds and then give their win percent. Well, now this goes through and actually goes through all the different Craftworlds and shows what is actually winning the most and what isn't. So, like, for example, Alaitoc, 59 or 57%. But then we go to Ulthwé, which is actually 59%. So it's hard to argue now that Alaitoc is actually better than Ulthwé, because Ulthwé has the better win percent. This is hard statistics, can't really argue with this. Ulthwé is doing better than Alaitoc overall. Even Bielton is doing better than Alaitoc overall. But then again, you gotta look at it this way too. It shows, what's this number? Number of lists and number of detachments. Okay, so let's go back down here. So for Alaitoc, because obviously it's the way more popular one, it has 288 lists, 381 detachments. But then when you go to Bielton, it has 24 lists with only 30 detachments. So that's a much smaller sample size compared to this right here. So you got to take that into account as well. Like same with all these, they have much smaller sample sizes compared to Alaitoc, which it seems like everybody just spams. Which makes sense because the -1 to hit mechanic is pretty decent, especially against gun lines. Well, pretty much only against gun lines. So yeah, that's it. Just cool little statistics to look at for every subfaction. So let's go over a few of these before we jump into the next page. So we have Adeptus Astartes, Raptors, but then again, look, it's only one game, one detachment, or one list at an event with one detachment, and they happen to win 66% of their games. So that's a very small sample size. I don't think it's worth it. If you go to Ultramarines are sitting at a 41%. Minotaurs, again, small sample size. I don't think it should really be counted. Iron Hands have a 30%. Imperial Fists have a 33%. I believe this goes over everything, like all of 8th edition altogether. So that kind of skews the data in a way because we've had tons of FAQs. We've had 2 chapter approved. We've had a bunch of stuff that changes the way that the game is played, like new codexes and everything like that too. So I think you can actually, yeah, you can go to date and you can actually pick the dates that you want to include. So you can do like everything after chapter approved. Okay, so now we only have the dates selected that were after the most recent chapter approved, and we hit OK. Boom. Now it just changes and shows, oh look, after chapter approved, Black Templars have a 60% win rate. Of course, it's a smaller sample size of games, but it's also only been like a month. So yeah, we have all that. We have this stuff. Ultramarines have gone up to 54.29%. So Ultramarines, chapter approved, did help them. It shows that, like, again, hard evidence, hard to argue with this. They are now doing better than they were before. They were at a 41% win rate pre-chapter approved, or with everything combined. And now with just post-chapter approved, they're at 54.29%. So chapter approved did help them. For Azuriani, or however you want to say that, Eldar, Alaitoc's only 53%, Biltan is 65%, Iandin, I guess, is 80%, Samhan, or Samhain, or I don't know, I don't speak Eldar, 85%, Althway 59%. So again, it's just showing that Alaitoc's actually not the best faction anymore. It would definitely, in my opinion, be Althway, but according to these results, it would be either Biltan or Samhan. But again, you got to look at the sample size. These are much smaller events. Or they could have been at smaller events. There might not have been any like actual top players there. So like there's a bunch of kind of factors you got to try to think about, but we don't have like, I can't tell whether these were at like a super large event or if these were at just like a GT that only had like 35 people or something like that. So you got to kind of consider all of that, but what I would do is just look at the sample size. These are definitely good sample sizes. So yeah, I would say, at least in this regard, that Althway is the better Craftworld. At least, yeah, right now. Chaos Demons, Slanesh is kind of doing horrible. And the other ones are all close to 50%. So again, I feel like that's balanced. You want as close to 50% as possible because that's where a balanced game is when everybody is at 50%. And again, that's not realistic to expect every army in the game to be at 50%. You just want them as close to 50% as possible. Then you get Chaos Space Marines, and it's just like, bleh. So yeah, Chaos Space Marines need some love. They're not doing so hot. You only have Black Legion, which is the only one that's close to 50%. Alpha Legion is kind of there, but not really. And then Emperor's Children, Iron Warriors, and World Eaters are just in the dumpster. But yeah, so that's about it. You guys can look through this yourself. I'm not going to go through every army. Again, I just wanted to show you these statistics and kind of show you how to use this site. So that's only 2 of the 4 pages that they have of statistics, so I still want to show you the other ones and talk about those a little bit. So the next one we're going to have is faction versus faction. Now this is my personal favorite to look at because this is where you find where your counters are. So you can look at, like right now for Adeptus Sororitas, which is Sisters of Battle, it shows you their average win percent against all the armies altogether. So of course against themselves they have a 50% win rate because they win that game and they lose that game at the same time if it's that army against its own self. You know what I mean? One has to lose, one has to win, so 50% win rate. But against Space Marines, they have an 80% win rate. Against Adeptus Custodes, they only have a 25% win rate. And yeah, you can go through this and you can see they beat Genestealer cults 100% of the times. But then again, they've only played one game against Genestealer cult, so not a very good sample size to go based off of. Some armies I want to look at here is, let's go to Astra Militarum. So you would click on this if you want to change the army. Click this little thing right here. Then you would unclick the army that's already selected, because it's not going to unselect it for you, and then it's just going to mess up all the stats. But yeah, so let's say we want to look up, where was it? Astra Militarum, Astra Militarum. Boom, right there. And then you hit OK. Here's all the Astra Militarum stats. So Adeptus Sororitas, they beat Sisters of Battle 55% of the time. They beat Space Marines 57% of the time. They beat Custodes 65% of the time. So Astra Militarum counters Custodes, which makes sense. I've said it in all my videos. Horde armies are really good against elite armies because they can just fill up the whole board, and there's not much elite armies can do about it. They don't have the guns, they don't have the amount of attacks to deal with that many bodies, so it makes sense. Astra Militarum, of course, has a 50% win rate against themselves, because again, if Imperial Guard is against Imperial Guard, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, so 50%. Azuriani, which is Eldar, Astra Militarum loses most of the time. They only win 41% of the time. They beat Blood Angels, Dark Mechanicus 100%, but then again, sample size, they've only had one game recorded altogether. Death Guard, they beat them most of the time. So when you look at this, you can easily see that Astra Militarum wins most of its matchups. But when you're looking at this and you're trying to compare for, let's say you want to build an Astra Militarum list to go to a tournament. Well, you know that you beat Custodes pretty easily. You know that you beat Adeptus Astartes pretty easily. You know that you beat Deathwatch pretty easily. You know that you beat ton of things pretty easily, at least according to these stats, right? So what you would want to look at, in my opinion, is you want to find the ones where you're in a losing matchup. So Drukhari or Inari, or that's really it, to be honest. Maybe Thousand Suns as well. So those are the three armies you got to look out for if you're playing Astra Militarum. That's how I would use this, is I'd like to see, like, what's my counters? Okay, those are my counters. I got to practice against those armies now to make sure that I know what I'm doing against them. I also have to tailor my list to be able to deal with these armies in case I go up against them. And with the armies being Thousand Suns, Inari, and Drukhari, those are all meta armies. So you're bound to go against at least one of those armies while you're at a grand tournament or a major event. So I would use this definitely to prepare and see what kind of matchups my army is bad in, so that way I can tailor my list to be good in those matchups and just prepare for them and practice for them. Because like if you know that you're going to beat Adeptus Custodes all the time, then there's no sense in really practicing against them that much. I would still practice against them because you still want to be knowledgeable about the matchup, but I mean, you need more practice in the ones where you lose more often. So yeah, that's how I would use this. So let's look at a couple other ones because I want to. We're going to go to my most disliked faction in the game, Inari. Oh look, it's like 1,000,000 win % for everything. They don't even have a bad matchup. There is not one bad matchup except for maybe Custodes, but even then they have a 50% win rate. So yeah, the Inari is just, yeah, no matter what army you play, Inari has a good win rate against you. And which is kind of funny that I noticed when I was looking at this, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I went and, because I played Drukhari, that's my tournament army, I went and looked at Drukhari, which, to be fair, they have a bunch of winning matchups as well. But then, it's not every winning matchup, though, in my defense. Deathwatch apparently murders us, but I'm assuming that's because the Inari variant that seems to be seeing the most play is like Coven units. And Coven units getting wounded on 2+ from the Deathwatch special ammunition is pretty good. So, yeah, that's why Deathwatch probably beats us a lot. With my own variant, where it's like a Cabal instead of a Coven, I think I would do better than this. But, yeah, that's just an opinion. So Astra Militarum, we have a 53% win rate, so not all that high, and that's because they have a ton of Toughness 3 bodies. And at least for me in my army, I have a bunch of Poison, and Poison's not that efficient against Toughness 3 because we wound everything on a 4+. So it's not like a Bolter where you're going to wound them on a 3+. Our Poison wounds them on a 4+. So Drukhari's win rate against Inari is here. And now you can probably see some of my bias towards the Inari. But even though with my bias I just showed you, Inari literally doesn't have any bad matchups. It's kind of dumb. They need to fix that faction. Or at least fix Soul Burst. And then really quickly, let's look at Imperial Knights. Dun, da, da, da. So now Imperial Knights, they have a bunch of close to 50% win rate. and then they have some that are pretty high, like Dark Angels, Death Guard. I'm assuming against Dark Angels is probably because most Dark Angel players spam Plasma, and Plasma only goes up to Strength 8, which is against Toughness 8. It's not the best. It's still okay, but it's not the best. Death Guard, they have a pretty high win rate against. Then Death Watch, they murder them pretty easily. Drukhari, they actually have a losing matchup too. Genestealer Cults, they have a losing matchup too. But that's because Aberrants and stuff are pretty damn good against Knights, in my opinion. And I guess this kind of goes to show it. Harlequins, they got 50%. And Imperial Knights, well, of course, 50% because Imperial Knights against Imperial Knights. And yeah, it goes to show Inari, they have a losing percent. Thousand Suns, of course they would have a losing percent against Thousand Suns, because Smite is like the bane of a knight's existence. You just smite one knight to death a turn, basically. So that's the faction versus faction breakdown. Like I said, I would use this to pick my own army. So say if I wanted to play Astra Militarum, let's go, or not Astra Militarum, Adeptus Astartes. If I wanted to play Space Marines, I click on this, and I can see what are my good matchups, what are my bad matchups. Apparently, I got a lot of bad matchups. So I just wouldn't play this army. I would then pick my next best army. Let's say I own Death Guard. Maybe I bought the Dark Vengeance set or something, and so I have Space Marines and Death Guard. So now let's go to Death Guard. Well, Death Guard has a little bit better of a win percent against everybody. So I would probably go with Death Guard over Space Marines. And if I was picking one of my current armies to play in a tournament. So then let's say we settled on Death Guard. Now I would find which armies that I have a weak matchup against, and I would practice against those armies to make sure that I know the matchup and that I can try to tailor my list to mitigate that matchup being so heavily favored in the other army's favor. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I would use the faction versus faction. This is my favorite statistic out of all of them, and yeah, I think it's a very useful tool when building your list or when going into an event and seeing what's what, basically, and trying to figure that kind of stuff out. So then the last thing we're going to talk about is their final statistics page, which is called First Loss, or TWIP, and TWIP stands for Tournaments in Winning Position. So the table below totals the first loss each faction sees in a tournament, and then uses the data to determine the average round that loss occurs. Basically what this is saying is, how many rounds on average can an army go before it gets its first loss? Now this is very important, because when you look at tournaments and stuff, the first three, let's say you're in a 6-round tournament, the first 3 rounds of that tournament, you're even if you win every game and you go up against other people that have won every game up to that point, you still have a chance to play some of the weaker armies. Like, I've seen Necrons go 3-0. I've seen Grey Knights go 3-0. I've seen a ton of armies go 3-0. But getting to that 4-0 point, that's the breaking point. If you can go 4-0 at a GT, then you're either a really good player or your list is a really good list, or a combination of both. So that's what this TWIP is, or yeah, the first loss. It shows which armies go the longest without getting their first loss. So the armies that can go 4 rounds, 5 rounds, or even 6 rounds without getting a loss, those are the top tier armies. Those are the armies that are going to consistently do well at events. Okay, so to explain this a little bit better, so like I said, you want your first loss to be later on in the tournament. You don't want to lose the first game of the tournament, because that's just bad. You don't want to lose the second game either. You don't want to lose the third game. The 4th game is where you're finally going to be getting that's where the competition starts heating up. So you want your first loss, if you are going to take a loss, to be in the 4th round or higher. So yeah, so what this list is trying to say, or what these statistics are trying to say, is that out of all the times, so total list, out of 39 Sisters of Battle lists that have played in events, I'm assuming throughout all of 8th edition, they've lost their first game 22 times. Or the first game that they've lost was the first round, and it happened 22 times. For the second round, they received their first loss 9 times. And then this number gets smaller as it goes. So there's only one person that played Sisters of Battle that made it to the 5th round before they got their first loss. That's what this is saying, essentially. So you want to find the armies that have higher numbers in the later rounds. So for example, Astra Militarum. Astra Militarum has a really high TWIP, because again, that's what's called TWIP. They have a really high TWIP. Of course, they lose a bunch of games on round 1, but that's also because a ton of people play Astra Militarum. There's 245 lists that we've seen throughout 8th edition so far. So, of course, a bunch of them are going to lose. Not everybody can be a skilled player. Not everybody's going to win all the time. So we have a bunch of people that lost their first game. 104 times people have lost their first game. 67 times people lost their second game. And this is where it starts getting out, like weeding out the not so skilled players. And this is where the good players are, is where they start losing here instead of they win their 3 games and they only get their first loss in either the 4th round, the 5th round, 6th round, 7th round, or they've went undefeated. So yeah, you want to look at the undefeated and you want to look at the high numbers over here, because not every army is going to be undefeated and stuff like that. Inari has a bunch of first losses in the early rounds, but then again, that's because a lot of people played the army. But they also have a lot of first losses in the later rounds, which goes to show that the skilled people playing the army, they can make it that many rounds with this army before they lose a game. So the easy way to do all this, like, it's nice to see all these numbers, but personally, I would just jump over to here, look at T-Whip percent, and see which ones are the highest. So we have Astra Militarum with a 14% T-Whip, we have Drukhari with an 11% T-Whip, we have Imperial Knights with a 9.5% T-Whip, we have Tau, Thousand Suns, and Inari, all with decently high T-Whips, at least one compared to other armies. So those are the armies that I would pretty much say are tier 1 armies. They're all very good, they're all armies that you will see in competitive play, which is kind of funny because those are all the armies that I put in tier 1 in my tier list video. So I guess my instincts were correct, and the statistics go to prove what I was saying all along, essentially. So yeah, that's exactly what this T-Whip is. It goes to show all that information. So yeah, it's very good information. It gives you exactly what you need to know. What armies can do well, which armies can't do well, because if you look at like Sisters of Battle, they have a very low T-Whip. And yeah, so all this information is really good. 40kstats.com, I think it's amazing. I think there's tons of stuff you can learn from this site when making your own list and trying to get into competitive, and when trying to determine which lists are going to give you the best chance of winning. And that's pretty much it. I think this site is absolutely amazing, so shoutouts again to Peter, aka the Falcon, for putting together all of these statistics for the community. Shoutout to Pablo and his podcast for informing me about this site. Shoutouts to the Best Coast Pairings app for making all of this information available, so it was easy for someone like Peter to put all this information together for the community. So if you plan on playing competitively or are actively trying to become one of the top players, I think this site is an amazing tool to help you achieve that goal. You can see what armies are doing well and which ones aren't. You can see what armies counter your army, so you can try to build accordingly in case that army happens to be meta and you know you're going to eventually face it at a large event. And overall, it's just an extremely helpful tool to help guide you in the right direction when it comes to your Warhammer 40k competitive journey. I hope you all enjoy this site as much as I do, and I hope it helps improve your Warhammer 40k game and your knowledge of the Warhammer 40k competitive scene. Anyways, before I end this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com. The Magnet Baron sells magnets of all sizes, magnetized movement trays, magnetized flight stands, and also sells a bunch of other 40k related goodies. So if you're looking for anything magnet related for the hobby, then check out themagnetbaron.com. So anyways, thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments what you think about all of this information and how you will use it when building your own competitive lists, as I am interested in hearing all of your thoughts. Also, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content like this. Also, if you want to help support the channel even further, then check out the Almost Pro Gaming Patreon page and consider making a pledge on Patreon. I offer all kinds of rewards for different size pledges, so pick a tier that suits your needs the best. Or if you don't care about the rewards and just want to help support the channel, then feel free to make a pledge for that reason as well. I appreciate and love all of my patrons, for without them, my channel would not be where it's at today, so thanks to everyone. So anyways, thanks again for watching the video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. Happy wargaming.